Evening, everyone. Paul quickly here. We'll get started in a couple of minutes. Now we have more people dialing in. Hi, Judy. Evening, Gerald. Evening, Brian. We're going to wait a few more minutes because I think we may be getting some more people. If you wouldn't mind, Rose, please unmuting Gerald and Bryant.
All right.
Hi, everybody. How are you?
Hello.
Hey, Gerald. Maybe we're competing with a nice warm evening.
It's beautiful out. How was the bike tour, Paul?
It was great, thank you. We got off at the Brooklyn Navy Yard and came back there, but I loved it. Did you enjoy?
I skipped this year because of the weather.
Oh, okay. We actually got to the Navy Yard just when it started raining, so it's perfect timing for us.
Oh, really? Yeah, I was looking at the weather and thinking about it with my wife, and we decided to bow out this year.
I'm going to set a hard cutoff. Oh, okay, Rick. Just 2 more minutes, and now it says 6:33 on my computer. When it's 6:35, we'll start. But I hope we get some more people.
Paul, perhaps at 6:34, Rose should give everybody the instructions of how we run our Zoom meetings.
Yeah, that'd be a great idea. Thank you. Please do that, Rose.
We'll start now.
Just in 2 minutes' time, or in 1 minute,
All right.
give everyone the instructions on how we run the meeting. A very cozy meeting tonight. I see more people joining now, so I think it's worth waiting a couple of minutes.
I'll give the instructions now.
Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. If this is your first time joining us virtually, you will notice that you are currently muted, and everyone will remain muted throughout the meeting except the committee chair, Paul, and any presenters as we move through the agenda. Following presentations, the chair will call on members of the public wishing to speak. You can participate by going to the reactions icon on your device and pressing the raised hand button, not the wave or thumbs up, as those will disappear. Only press it once. If you press it a second time, your hand will go back down. If you're calling on the phone, it is *+9 to raise hand and *+6 to unmute. Be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting once the chair calls on you. The chat is available for technical support only, to help with Zoom software problems, not to ask questions of the chair. They will not see the chats. If you are using an older version of Zoom, you will need to go to participant sections, where you will find the raise hand feature there. Please do not raise your actual hand or wave at the screen, because we may not be able to see you. And you can chat me or Will, because we're here to support.
Thank you, Rose. I'm going to go ahead and start the meeting now. So welcome everyone to the Roosevelt Island Committee of CB8. I'm Paul Crichton, the chair of this committee. We have first item up is REOC updates. So I'm going to ask Bryant Daniels, first of all, if you have anything you want to update people on, and we'll take general questions. Just, following that, we have Gerald Ellis giving us a tutorial in how to understand what REOC does. So some of your questions may be more appropriate for Gerald. I'll let Brian decide that stuff. Over to you, Brian.
Thanks, Paul. I can just give a couple of quick updates now that we're heading into the spring season, and happily the cherry blossoms are done blooming. So hopefully that'll improve everyone's tram experience. I just want to point out a couple of events we have coming up. So the next board meeting, REOC Board of Directors meeting, is scheduled for Tuesday, May 14th, next week. Then we also have Roosevelt Island Day coming up. That's going to be Saturday, June 8th. And communications are going out about that soon to community groups interested in signing up. I guess, I can probably at this point just turn it over to Gerald if he wants to get into it. And I assume some folks might have some questions and things like that, and we're happy to take them.
Great, thank you, Gerald. Thanks, Brian.
Sure. Can I share my screen? Or is that Paul, how should we
Yeah.
I can share screen?
Yeah, you can share your screen now.
Okay, let's see. If there's any questions that people have before we get started, feel free to raise a hand or jump in. All right, you guys can see this PowerPoint, right?
Yep.
All right, let me go into presentation mode. All right. Just some background. Paul had asked me, well, I guess for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Gerald Ellis. I am the Deputy General Counsel at REOC. Since January, myself and Drew Mean, the CFO, have been the interim leadership at REOC since the previous CEO and General Counsel were put on paid leave. So in the meantime, Drew and I have been running things. And Paul asked me to come and speak with your committee just to give a general overview and answer questions about kind of the basic day-to-day of what REOC does, why we do it, how we came into existence, what is our corporate purpose, all that good stuff. So feel free, like I said, to jump in with any questions as we're going through this. So I put together a few slides. REOC, for some people who don't know, I was just explaining this the other day on a call with folks from the MTA who didn't know that we were a state agency, which I guess if you had no reason to ever know about us, you wouldn't know about us. But REOC is a small state agency, and we were created, I guess I might be getting ahead of myself with the slides, but we were created to operate and manage Roosevelt Island. We were spun off from ESD, or the Urban Development Corporation, in the 1980s. But that's our mandate. So as you know, Roosevelt Island's a 2-mile long, I believe 800 feet at its widest strip of land between Queens and Manhattan. It's got a fascinating history. As I am fond to tell people, the history of the island really matters. It's very helpful to know about the history of the island in terms of knowing about its current existence. Why is this thing there? Why, all sorts of questions are actually answered by digging into the history of the place, which is something I, for one, love about it. But It's just really important to know the backstory. So we have a bunch of different departments. I don't think we're going to get into that level of detail for this call, or for this presentation, I should say. But just background on some of the different, I call them business units, but you can think of departments, however you want to think of it. On the one hand, we're a transportation company, essentially. We operate the tram, or we own the tram, I should say. It's operated by Poma, Leitner Poma. And then we have our red bus fleet as well, which we do operate ourselves. And so on that end, we're like a transportation company. We also have a number of business units that are community service oriented. So the youth center, the sports park, and we have a public safety department, obviously, peace officers, folks who do not carry guns but are authorized to make arrests, issue summons, and are charged with helping keep the island safe and keep it orderly. So we have those units. We also have an engineering department, all the normal kind of departments that you would expect out of any corporation, a legal department, fiscal, HR, admin. But the primary business of the island is operating and maintaining the island. So I guess by number, the largest unit of ours is PSD. Second to that, I would say generically, it's our operations folks. So that includes grounds department, maintenance department, and then all of the administrative folks who oversee those departments as well. All right, so some of this interesting backstory. So I'm a real estate lawyer by trade. The island, it's actually quite important, the real estate history of the island, in terms of the day-to-day. Again, I always kind of come back to the day-to-day, but it is helpful to know all this backstory. It's critical in a lot of cases, and anything having to do with real estate on the island, it's very important, the history of the place. So the basic history of the island, it was Blackwell's Island. It was owned by the Blackwell family, and it was essentially a family farm until 1828, when it was purchased by the city of New York. The city of New York used the island essentially as a place to put undesirables. It was a place for workhouses, prisons, asylums, research facilities, things that they wanted to keep sequestered from the rest of the city. They would put them on Roosevelt Island. And so and then a lot of those places fell into disrepair over time. And so by the time we go from 1828 to 1968, a lot of the island had fallen into disrepair, and the city was, essentially going bankrupt at that time, right? Fort to city, drop dead, that era. The Bronx is burning. It was kind of that time in New York, and the city did not have money to invest in Roosevelt Island. And the state had recently created the Urban Development Corporation, which was a really ambitious project of the state of New York to develop housing. And so ESD, or excuse me, UDC, and sorry about all these acronyms. So it was originally called, this state agency, the state of New York, was called the Urban Development Corporation, UDC. It still exists. It's now referred to as ESD, the Empire State Development Corporation. So you probably hear me refer to it as ESD, but that's what I'm referring to. They were originally our parent corporation. So they spun off REOC as a subsidiary in 1984, and REOC was then given the task of operating and maintaining Roosevelt Island. And so that's how we came into existence. All right, the basics of REOC, we're a public benefit corporation, and in our enabling legislation, it lays out all this. It lays out our corporate governance structure. So we're governed by a board of directors. By law, 2 people from the state are on the board. The chairperson of the board is the Commissioner of Housing. Right now, that's Ruth Ann Visnauskas. And then also by law, the director of the budget is also on our board. So those two state officials typically send designees in their place. So right now, the designee from the housing, from the Department of Housing is Megan Anderson. And the designee from the Department of Budget is Morris Peters. So those are both state employees, good public servants, both. And then by law, the rest of the board members are nominated by the governor, and then they are confirmed by the Senate. And of those 7 other members, there are 9 slots total. The governor gets to appoint all but 2 of them. 2 of them are recommended by the mayor. And by law, of those 7 other board slots, 5 of those board members need to be island residents by law. So currently, there are 6. There's the 2 state officials on our board, and then there are 6 island residents. And that's the current state of our board. Also in our enabling legislation and in our bylaws also, there are a number of key positions that are outlined. The CEO and president and CEO, and then vice presidents, again, pretty typical stuff. The general counsel, the CFO, and then critically for REOC, since we're an operating corporation, as David Kraut likes to point out, and he's right, we are an operating corporation. So another critical position for us is the vice president of operations, or the COO. So that's what's laid out in our bylaws. And then from that level below, that's the prerogative of the corporate structure, essentially. And the departments and whatnot are left at the discretion of the executive leadership in order to follow through and follow through with our mission to operate and maintain the island. So the current, got a list here, right, of critical operations that we undertake. So capital planning and projects, we're responsible for all capital planning and projects on the island. And that's things like the recent rehabilitation of sports park, rehabilitating the youth center, the work that we're doing at Eleanor's Pier, all that sort of work. Pretty capital intensive work that requires planning as well. So roadways project, we're right now fairly, I would say we're about 80% through the design phase on a project to redo Main Street. It needs a lot of repair work. Anyone is familiar, if you're familiar with our Main Street, you know that it requires some repair. And so that is a good example of one of these big capital projects that requires a lot of planning. We have a horticulture and grounds crew. They are responsible for things like maintaining the parks, picking up the garbage, all that work. It's really critical work. Engineering facilities, again, these Alvaro Santa Maria, if you're familiar, is the head of that department. Very knowledgeable engineer, and he's involved with all sorts of everything on the island that you might think he would be involved with. So the tram, the AVAC facility, any kind of road work that we're doing, he's involved. Transportation, so this is mainly our bus fleet. The folks who operate the tram, like I said, that's POMA, a separate company entirely. So all the employees that you see at the tram, those are not REOC employees, except for PSD. You might see PSD down there, but if it's an employee who's operating the tram or working at the tram, that's they're POMA employees. We have a communications department, that's Bryant, and the folks who work for Bryant, they are fantastic. Thank you for all your work. Public safety, as I mentioned earlier, and the youth center. And then we have all the administrative departments, finance, HR, IT, legal, etc. Yeah, a couple critical points here. again, for background, but this is really important background on our financing. So we're entirely, Roosevelt Island REOC is entirely self-financed. So we don't receive any allocations in the budget from the state. All of our funding, or really the vast majority of our funding, comes from ground rent and from commercial leases. And I know that, you know, this is actually a really critical feature of the island. I think a lot of people maybe misunderstand this feature. Think of it this way. Let me put it this way to you. The Chrysler building has a similar structure where the building is owned separately from the land. So the building recently sold a couple years back, and I think it sold for like $150 million, which is in real estate, in New York real estate, that's not a lot of money considering it's the Chrysler building. Because what's really valuable there, more than the building, much more than the building, is the land that it sits on. And so every year, the owners of the building then are paying their landlord, the people who own the land, right? Similar situation with Roosevelt Island. Except that the landlord is not some hedge fund, or it's not a pension fund or something. In our case, the landlord is REOC, it's the local government, right? So the money that you all are paying in ground rent, it stays on Roosevelt Island. That's what pays for the free bus service. That's what pays for the tram. That's what pays for keeping the parks clean, keeping it. That's what pays for AVAC. That's what pays for all of REOC services. It's what pays for PSC. It's what pays for us. It's what pays for the repairs to all the parks, the line striping. We could go on and on and on. But I think that the critical point that I just want to make is that the money stays on Roosevelt Island. Yes, you know, you are paying for this, obviously, for these services in the form of the ground rent, but the ground rent is not going off to a hedge fund or a pension fund or something. It's not going off to investors somewhere. It's staying on the island, and it's staying on the island in the form of REOC.
Hey, Gerald,
Yes.
can I just jump in for a second? Next month, you're going to come back and talk about the master lease. So this would seem to me a great time to bring that subject up briefly without going into lots of detail about what's going to happen and when and why. But just if for some reason people think that we should not renew the master lease, but we should actually become part of the city, which may be very attractive for many people, and this is the point to make, I think, about what disappears. You know, the city takes over doing what in place of what.
Yeah, and we can talk about this in more detail, like you said, at the next meeting. But yeah, I mean, that's exactly how to think of this, right? If REOC ceased to exist tomorrow, where would these services come from? Who's going to pay for the red bus service? Who's going to keep the parks clean? Who's going to run the AVAC system? Imagine Roosevelt Island just without AVAC, right? Just imagine all the garbage trucks. If we needed garbage trucks on the island, if there was no AVAC system, imagine all the rats that would come along with that, right? The piles of garbage waiting to be picked up all along Main Street. Those are things that thankfully we never notice, we never have to think about because we have the AVAC system, because we have REOC. But that's just one example. And we could go on and on. So whatever it is, you know, imagine instead of being able to call REOC for issues with garbage collection, you had to call 311. I live in Astoria, and I know what it's like to have to rely on regular old city services, and they're actually pretty good where I live. But I think in honesty, you know, Roosevelt Island residents have much better services, what we would all think of as municipal services, city services. You guys have much better city services than we do in Queens, for instance.
So just to jump in there, we're 12,000 people or 15,000 people, whichever number is the right one. I don't know, that's like half a city block on the Upper East Side. So we wouldn't get much attention from the city, let alone the council member, compared to what we get now, is my thought. I'll back to you.
That's exactly right. And that's a great point. And that's another one of the one of the bigger points that I think we just take for granted and we don't necessarily think about. But I teach and I always tell my students pretty early on, right? Because I don't even think of it this way, but New York City is an archipelago, right? It's all islands. The only part of New York City that's connected to the mainland United States is the Bronx. Everything else is an island. And of all the little islands that comprise New York City, especially the smaller outer lying islands, Roosevelt Island, and I guess City Island, but it's the only residentially populated island. It's unique. There are other outer long islands that are populated, Rikers. There are some folks who live on Randall's Island, but nothing like Roosevelt Island. And it was very intentionally, because it is isolated, it was set up intentionally with this structure, with this extra help from the state. The state did not, it was well planned. The original plan for the island called for the subway to be built here and then for the housing to be constructed. The MTA delayed the opening of the subway by 5 years. And so then the state had to step in, and that's why we have a tram, right? It was an emergency fix to provide mass transit for the folks who lived on the island in those first few years. So it's been very well thought out for what it is, I think. And to Paul's point, the level of attention and service that Roosevelt Island receives from the state, I think, is actually extraordinary, frankly. And there are all sorts of examples. I was at an event on Saturday at Four Freedoms Park, and it's one of the few state parks that are located downstate. That's not a coincidence that the state was going to make such a big investment downstate, that they were going to do it here on Roosevelt Island. And that's one of many things like that I can think of. Things that don't show up in our budget per se, right? There's a lot of discussion right now with Eleanor's Pier because we've had some railings fall there. There's a plaque actually on the eastern wall of Eleanor's Pier that briefly discusses that it was a gift from the state of New York, that it was financed by the state of New York independently in the early 1990s. That's just, again, another example. This state periodically will absolutely do that for Roosevelt Island because it's this state project. So they do every once in a while come in, like the cavalry coming in to save us or help get things done that need to get done. The tram overhaul, the last tram overhaul about 10, 15 years ago, that's another good example. Something that REOC, I don't think, could have financed on its own. The state came in and helped pay for. So that's a brief, I'll stop sharing now. That's a brief, I think, overview of REOC, what we do, why we exist, how we came into being. And then I think a good amount too of also, what do you all receive in exchange? How is this good for the community? Well, a lot of the services we operate, I think are very unique, and I don't think you'd get if you lived anywhere else in New York City. Frank, your hand is up.
I just want to say one quick thing first before I go to Frank. Just want to say one quick thank you to you. For those of you who don't know, I've only been here 4 years, and some people on the screen have been here decades, longer than that. So my perception, just from that limited point of view, is that it was very hard to have discussions ranging from that all the way to completely being ignored by REOC in the past, with some exceptions I hear. Now, the most recent iteration of management was definitely of the latter camp. We couldn't get anything from them. And so this is a huge about change, or a sea change, not about change, a sea change since about January, since Drew and Gerald were put in charge as interim leaders. So it's great. And I think it's, we're going to have more sessions like this. If people have ideas of or questions of things they'd like answered, if they think it's a session, like the master lease session, which is very important to all of us, even though many of us don't know about it. If you have ideas, please let me know. And I'm sure that between Brian, Gerald, and Drew, they'll find someone to talk. Thank you. I'll stop now. Let's go over to Frank.
Hi, and Frank Ferentz, President of the Roosevelt Island Residents Association. Hello, everyone. I just wanted to first of all, let me just pick up where Paul had just said it. The past several months, I'd say this year, this calendar year, have been refreshing interaction with REOC. Just sort of the day-to-day nuts and bolts things have gotten addressed. I know they don't sound like a lot, but they matter because they're little issues that then go away, and because they're addressed. And I'm very appreciative of that. And I think there's also been an outreach to the community. I think we've always had public safety in terms of being connected, but it's really nice to see yourself, Gerald, and also and especially Brian. Let me just give the round of applause, which I know we all appreciate the good work that he's been doing, because I think the communications with the community have been more effective. Yeah, they've been two-way, and at least there's we're on a upswing. I've seen some good times in the past with REOC, and some times that were frustrating. I've lived here for 44 years, so I appreciate that. And the last thing I'd like to say is, I think you forgot one compliment that's really important, or at least I think so, from REOC's perspective, is that in 2013, although you mentioned public safety, we switched to a community policing model, definitely one of the first, in a large scale way in the US, and also was different than what was going on elsewhere in the city. And that had a lot of positive effects, for the community, including the youth and the generations that grow, that go on. And overall, I think, it's been said many times by directors of public safety, but this is the safest community in the city. And, that's been a nice collaboration, but, most importantly, with the officers and the leadership in public safety. So thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Let's go to Brandon, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I joined late. I was coming from another meeting. I know you all know that I'm very new to this island. I appreciate the presentation. I wish I caught the beginning of it. I had asked in the chat, not realizing that I had to use the raise hand function. I was curious, does the MTA give any kickbacks to the island when it comes to the tram?
Can we please unmute Gerald and Bryant? Thanks, Rose.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, I muted myself. No, so the MTA, right, so the tram. Okay, the basic gist with the tram. The tram is operated on a franchise granted by the city council. So just like the city council would give the right to Tavern on the Green to open a restaurant in Central Park, same kind of situation where the city council has to authorize a gondola in the city, right? So when they first did that, part of the deal was that they tied the price of a gondola, of a ride on the system, to it's always got to be the same price as a swipe on the subway. So they did this also with the ferry when it was created recently. And then it took them a few years and they eventually decoupled those prices. So that's number one. And for a long time, we used to have tokens. Like we would collect these tokens ourselves and sell them ourselves. But it was still the same price. But we did, this is before Metro cards, like back when there were subway tokens, we used to have tokens too. And so then we entered into an agreement with the MTA when they introduced MetroCard to get MetroCard for the tram. So we have that agreement still in place. And then more recently, we entered into another agreement with them for Omni, to get Omni installed on the turnstiles. So the terms of all the agreements are slightly different. we get a different amount of money per if you use a Metro card versus if you use Omni. So the agreement with the MTA for a Metro card swipe is that we get $2 and then the MTA gets the rest. So that was agreed a long time ago when it was like $2.25 a swipe, and then as it's gone up, we've gotten proportionally less and less, and now it's $2.75, but we still get $2. So it's better for REOC if people use Omni. The deal with Omni, it's $2.90 now, I believe, and we get, or rather, I should say, MTA only gets 10 cents per tap, and then we get the rest. So, and that's the way that deal is set up. So if then they increase, the fare to $3 per swipe or per tap, they'll still only get 10 cents a tap on that. So we'll then get $2.90 instead of $2.80. So that's we're paying them basically, and we're paying them to be integrated into the system. We're paying them because we had all the turnstiles installed, all that sort of stuff. But it's a partnership, I would say, generally with the MTA.
Thank you. Judy.
Good afternoon, good evening. Just go away for a week and it's back, and there's no more cherry blossoms in bloom. I think we survived cherry blossom time very well. I don't think we had any major catastrophes, and from what I gather, I came home, the cherry blossoms were gone, the place turned green. I still have a supply of tram tokens if anyone wants to collect them. It was a gift to me from the tram. First of all, I want to thank the ticket system. It does great things. I mean, people just don't use it. It's so good. There was a problem with the paving at the Octagon bus stop. There was a big broken spot there. Put it in, it was repaired in 2 days. I mean, we really should push that more. I know, Gerald, you were very disappointed to hear that we're not having the 4th of July fireworks.
Very, very disappointed.
Yes, I think it's about time that the Hudson River had the honor for a few years.
We need I'm sure it'll be back eventually.
Eventually is fine. I'm bringing a tour on Saturday from a group called Untapped New York, and they're going to visit Blackwell House. We really have to reconsider opening the house to the public, even if it's just weekends. Downstairs, the living room, 2 rooms, let people see the house. Nothing is worse and makes a building deteriorate more than leaving it closed up. No life in the building. It becomes a subject of vandalism. And I know that building is wood, and I know if someone isn't checking it every day, the air conditioning goes off, the heat goes off, something happens. So really, let's see if we can at least get the house open to the public, like 11 to 5 on Saturday and Sunday, because so many of the visitors come and they want to go in the house. And the kiosk people say, I'm sorry, it's closed. And there's no reason for the first floor not to be open. It's a public space.
Would you, I don't disagree with you. Are you interested in leading the tours, or is that?
Well, if we could make a financial agreement for us to do tours. No, this is a tour that's a group called Untapped New York, and they're giving the Historical Society a small donation, trust me, to lead a tour there. But it's not just tours, it's just visitors coming in and having someone in the house for a certain number of hours to keep the building open and thriving, because nothing is sadder than seeing the window shades down, because the window shades have been down there for so many years that I think they're stuck in a down position. And one other thing is, next year is our 50th anniversary. Have we started thinking?
We have definitely started thinking.
Right, Brian, you look thrilled about this.
We're gonna have fireworks, Judy. They're gonna be on the East River. It's gonna be grand.
The first person moved into the first apartment on April 25th, 1975, which happens to be my birthday. So if you want that, if you want to celebrate the 50th anniversary, the day the first tenant moved in, that was it. Oh, stop it, Paul.
Let's just call it Judy's birthday party and just leave it at that.
I know so many people, I might as well, I'll give you.
Let's go to Brandon. Sorry, have you finished, Judy?
I'm finished. That's
Okay,
it.
thank you. Brandon.
I was just going to say, I've been trying to visit the Blackwell House since I started on the island. I would very much appreciate that, but not just myself, like Judy said. I've had patrons come in a couple times and ask us, when is one of the operating hours? When can we do this? And we don't have an answer. So I'd like to second that.
I'll third it. I went in there once for some function. I think it's lovely.
Very lovely. There's a lot of history in the photographs and plaques that are on the first floor. So yes, we will absolutely look into that. One of the problems, honestly, is just staffing. We need them to staff for those tours. So that's something for us to work through internally. But I think that's a very fair suggestion.
Thank you, Gerald. Can we go to Rick, please?
Well, first of all, I just want to agree with what Paul and Frank said about the tremendous improvements that have gone on at RIAC over the last 4 months. So just want to thank Gerald and Drew and Brant and your entire RIAC team. It's really been a pleasure the last few months. And I'm just shocked I'm saying this, but it's true. So I'm just wondering, what are the 3 or 4 upcoming challenges that RIAC is facing in the near future?
How near a future are you talking?
As far out as you want to go.
Oof.
The 3 or 4 most important things on your plate right now.
That's a tough question. I mean, we have obviously this interim situation is very difficult. And it presents its own whole, there are all kinds of challenges that just flow from that alone. So I think that's at the top of my list.
For example, what, Gerald? What flows?
Well, like there are certain hiring decisions that we cannot or should not make while we're in this interim position.
Big projects?
Yeah, there are big projects that we can't explore or don't want to explore while we're in this position. The basic day-to-day repairs we're obviously doing, and are big priorities for us, but something like the master lease discussions, right? A major priority. I was just meeting today with the Racket Club, and Skip Hartman mentioned this to me, and it's obviously a big priority for TRIBA, for a lot of folks on the island, right? An extension of the master lease. We have had conversations with the city of New York about this, but we can't really make progress on those discussions or on that negotiation until we have more certainty internally about our own governance structure, about our own direction. So I think that, again, they're internal, external, all sorts of things that flow from that one issue that we don't yet have permanent leadership.
Do you have any sense of where things stand, timing, anything at all?
I don't. We have our next board meeting on the 14th. Maybe there's going to be some movement there. I'm optimistic, but I don't know. And I've learned not to get ahead of myself in hoping or in predicting that anything might or might not happen at a board meeting. Other priorities, immediate things. Eleanor's Pier is a major priority for us right now. I was just there today with Lydia Tang, and we were looking at the current state of affairs. We'd like to proceed with an emergency procurement because it's an emergency. And we are in the process of getting a structural engineer to come out and review our plans and give us the sign off. And so we can get started on making those repairs. There are little things that come up here and there. There was a tree that needed to come down in Blackwell Park, and I saw today that was taken down, which is good. That was an immediate health and safety risk, I think. The tree was just old and had become infested with termites and needed to come down. So I guess it depends on any given day, right? What my certain things are always going to be priorities for me, but like the tree, for instance, that's off my list because it's been taken down, thankfully. Our bus system is another big priority for me. It's just we don't really have much latency in that system. We're down some buses, and any little thing that goes wrong with one of the remaining buses, and then that becomes a big problem. So the other day, I think a rear view mirror was knocked off of one of our buses, and it took the bus out of service. It's not a huge problem per se, but it was something we can get repaired pretty quickly, right? But nevertheless, that bus has got to come out of service. We don't have any spares laying around, especially while the repair is being made. So then that creates problems for us. So hard to answer. It's a good question, Rick. Tough to answer. But those are, off the top of my head, the things that come to me as big priorities.
Where does managing the longer tram lines fit into the priorities? Because that, of course, that's one of the big frustrations of everybody who lives on the island. Any ideas, or is it just, we have to live with it?
No, I don't think it's a matter of you have to live with it. I think one of the things that we had discussed and that we're hoping to go live with very soon is tram cams. We've installed some cameras on the Roosevelt Island side and on the Manhattan side so that folks could log into our website and be able to see a feed. So you'd be able to see if there's a line, particularly on the Manhattan side. So if you're coming home and you're in Manhattan, you could at least check, right? And it would be a live feed, like a traffic camera. You'd be able to get a live feed, so you'd know if there's a big line in the plaza forming, and you could make a decision to either, take the tram and wait in line, or take the subway. Thank God the subway is back in service. So that I think is something we'll be able to go live with, hopefully quickly soon.
So on that question, during the worst of the F train shutdown, there were lots of discussions around priority boarding and other things that could be done, not just straightforward priority boarding, but there was some discussion about different pricing. I'm not quite sure how that would work. If we had an expensive price for tourists and regular subway price for residents, I guess the hope is you'd scare off some of the tourists and still make lots of money. Is that the idea?
So the idea, I mean, I think this is a delicate matter, actually, this idea of decoupling the pricing. Like I said, the pricing is coupled to the price of a subway swipe. And if you're looking at examples where it's been decoupled, the example that jumps out is the ferry. And the ferry, the price, when they were decoupled, when the price of a subway swipe and the ferry were decoupled, the price went up quite a lot.
But if I could just jump in there, what most people do who use the ferry a lot, like residents, you buy a 10-pack,
Yeah, exactly.
$29, $2.90. So you're not actually decoupling it. What you're doing is having differential pricing.
Well, but this is right. You get a discount for a bulk buy, but there's not actually a special price for residents.
No. You just make the assumption that most people do that. You'd be nuts. No tourist will do that.
Right.
This is a big bunch of people.
I mean, maybe they will, right? In which case they get the better price.
But back to the question, any further thoughts on what we can do to help? Because we had, obviously, during the F train shutdown, it was murder, it was awful, it was terrible.
Yeah.
We've seen during cherry blossom season also terrible lines as well. I think what some people are concerned about is that with the rise of lots of these video YouTube bloggers who love coming to Roosevelt Island, that we're not just seeing this wane off again. This is a steady progression, getting more and more and more. So people are groaning about living with it. Now, we'd love to have tourists come and visitors to come, but if you live here, it can be a strain.
Yes. I believe I'm not a fan of Instagram stars or TikTok, But
the reality is that they're coming whether we like them or not.
Well, exactly, yeah, and the reality is it's a social phenomenon that's much bigger than Roosevelt Island, right? And so it's I'll say too, I was just on vacation and I was in Italy, and there are I went to Venice when I was there, and Venice famously suffers from over tourism, and there's some things that I want to, one thing that they do is they charge basically a tourist fee if you're visiting and you're staying overnight. but they've also started to do that for a day fee. I'm not suggesting that we should do that or that we even could. But I think that there are other places that we can look at that are good models, that are experimenting with some of these same, well, they experience the same issue, maybe at a larger scale, place like Venice or, but there are other ideas from other places that I think are worth looking at and exploring.
When you've got some further thoughts, would love to hear them here.
So could I just come in on
Sure.
that one for a second? So there's a concept that's being labeled tourism pollution, which is caused by the overcrowding of tourists on local infrastructure. And Venice is one example, as is Barcelona. And they're all those cities are trying to come up with ways of balancing the quality of life of local residents with tourism. So I'm just maybe suggesting, taking a look at how some of these other locations are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, maybe this is easier said than experienced too, but frankly, this is a good problem to have, right? These are places that people really want to visit. They're places that are in all of these places that you just listed are places that are a nice place to live. They're beautiful places. They're places that are great to come spend time. And so, in a sense, it's, right, it's a blessing and a curse. And this is the part where maybe it becomes a curse, but I think those are good examples. And I agree. I think they're worth looking into what these other cities are doing to cope with this.
Thank you, Jared. Let's go to Brandon and then Judy and then Frank.
Just to bring it back to the Blackwell House, I would definitely have to check with my higher ups in our different departments, but that might be something that we could partner on, Judy, with the Historical Society, possibly doing tours. Just throwing it out there.
Nice
And
one.
Brian,
Thank
you
you.
can talk about that too down the line.
Fabulous. Thank you. Judy, if we unmute Judy, please.
Okay, first of all, health and safety, right? How about some more toilets? What do we have to do on this island to get toilets? First of all, the tram staff has no toilets. Both the toilets are out because there's a sewer problem. I'm sure Skip Hartman has discussed that with you. There's a big sewer problem between the tram sewer line and the tennis. It is disgusting. Now, I'm sorry, this cannot go on. Even my staff, Ellen was working today. She has to go spend 20 minutes to go down to Cornell to use a ladies' room. The porta potties are disgusting if we have any, and it's just complete frustration. We have to budget and build more toilets at by firefighters field. This has been kicked around for years. It's always mañana, mañana, mañana. But I was in the kiosk for 2 hours today. There were at least 20 people coming in and asking for bathrooms. During the week, I send them to Cornell Tech. On weekends, if they come in and Cornell Tech is closed, I have to send them to the hotel. It was all the way down to
Sports Park, Judy. Sorry to interrupt, but
no, because Sports Park won't let people in to use their VIP toilets. They refuse to let people in, which is ridiculous. They have 2 public bathrooms in their lobby that is before the entrance. They refuse to let people in, which is wrong. It's your property. It's your responsibility. It's owned and operated by RIAC. You have to tell the staff if people come in, they have to let them use the bathrooms. I mean, it is complete frustration. And, people come in from all over the world and they sort of look at me, you don't have a bathroom here? I have to send them down to Cornell. It's a really, should we say, bad taste in your mouth? It's, you can put it in your budget. It's, I'm sure there's a way we can do this. You buy them, they're it's got a sewer line to work. You buy them, you install them, they're precast, they're everything. But, that's the sad thing. I mean, you can talk about all these wonderful things, all about tourism, all about visitors. I was just in Bermuda, this little island that 10,000 people converge on, and they've seemed to manage it. With just a few ferries and things, but it's, that's my complete frustration here. No one comes into the chaos. No one from RIAC has ever come in and asked us for our statistics. No one has ever come in and said, Judy, how many visitors did you have? Where are they from? No one ever has asked. We're the ones that are the experts on tourism here because we see them 365 days a year, and no one has ever come in and asked us who they are, where they come from, what they ask for, aside from toilets.
I've asked
So-
you via email, Judy. I've been
you-
coming to the kiosk, but I've asked you some of those questions.
You know, yes, you did. You asked me on the, when did you
Fair
get to?
enough.
But no, you know, I'm
Thank
just
you,
gonna
Judy.
write a book, Roosevelt Island, Land Without Toilets. That's
Thank
it.
you, Judy. Let's go to Frank and then we're going to go to Chloe.
Here we go. Thank you. Just this is in the weeds, but something for the bus, and pretty much everything else that you operate. And I know there's difficulty in getting parts. You should look into the methodology called the minimum equipment list. It's used actually in many modes of transportation, but applies in general. And you can figure out how to operate equipment safely, of course, but with either restrictions or limitations, and that doesn't cause every broken part an outage of service. So, but you would evaluate that for each of your categories of equipment. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank.
Chloe.
Oh, hi, I'm Skylar. I had another suggestion for the bus. One easy thing that I think is easy, and then another more complicated thing. One, can we just have we all sign up for these email announcements, these alerts. Can we just have something for the bus coming through those emails? That's the sole reason I signed up for the emails. Like, for example, the Octagon Express is not running now, and we had to just find out just by waiting there and seeing that it wasn't running. So, and then the more complicated thing is, I think on the last meeting I attended, we talked about the long-term bus plan, and we were going to get another bus in a few years or something. It seems like maybe you're more familiar with this problem than me, but it seems like we need something sooner than that at the rate we're losing parts and losing buses. So I'm wondering if you have any plan for that.
Yeah, so just to go back, the last, I think what you're referring to in the discussion was about purchase. We're going to purchase 2 buses, and that's we've got like a year. It'll take about a year for that to happen, right? So the other thing that we had looked into was an emergency lease, if we needed to get another bus on a kind of an emergency basis. So we looked into that, and we priced that out. It'd be a 12-month lease, and it would get us another bus.
What was the cost of that?
I want to.
It was 200,000 for a year, something like
Yeah,
that.
I think it was 200,000 for 1 year.
So emergency, we're not in emergency now. If one of the 4 buses we have completely got broken, wasn't going to be a 1-week fix.
Yeah, it's tough, right? Because they can, little things can take them out of service, right? Things that you wouldn't necessarily think would take a bus out of service can take them out of service for some amount of time. And then if that happens, say to 2 buses simultaneously, that can be a real problem, right? Which is why I think the Octagon bus was not in service. And I apologize that there was no advisory that went on that. That's something we need to work on. But yes, so this issue, like I said, it's one of the major issues on my list, keeping good, reliable bus service. And on the one hand, we're looking, like I said, at buying 2 more buses for the fleet. But the other thing that we priced out, like I said, is an emergency lease. And that literally is something that we were just discussing this afternoon again. When we just presented it last week at a committee meeting, and it was not something, frankly, that I was thinking would already be on my to-do list a week later, but I'm glad that we did that work. It's something that we're looking at.
I think the bus is actually one perfect example of why, Gerald, you and I decided that we should have more information to the community. I would guess that there are 12,000 people on the island who think that the bus should be there all the time, should be running perfectly, extra add-ons when we need it, even at the basic level, that there should be always a basic service. I would guess there are probably about 30 or 50 people who are residents who might have a good handle on how few buses we have and exactly where we stand, the aging and all that stuff. I think there's a massive mismatch, and this is one way, therefore, to start the process of getting people to know more about this.
Yeah. And then to top it all off too, you know, our Cy Opperman just retired. The director of our transportation department, who is, if you know him, he's an amazing guy. But it's just time for him to retire. And so he's retired, but it really puts us in a tough position. That's one of the other positions that we really need to fill right now. And we're actively trying to do that. Add a position too, to give us some redundancy on the personnel side.
Thank you. So let's go to Rick next.
Just continuing on the red bus.
Yes.
When you had said that you're going to be putting in a GPS system on the red bus so people can track their schedule, the schedule of the red bus.
Yeah.
Do you have an anticipated date for that?
Brian, do you know?
I don't know off the top of my head. I think we were looking at a couple months for implementation, and that was a few weeks ago. So I think it's just a matter of getting and installing the materials at this point. But I don't, off the top of my head, know exactly where that stands. But it's basically, I mean, I believe we entered into contract with it, and
That's good to know.
it's on the list of things that are coming in short order. I just don't know exactly what.
Sometime this summer would be.
I think the plan
Yeah.
was, the spring or early summer.
And just what about the schedule for the tram camera that you mentioned? What would that be? When would that be?
That one, hopefully we can get done. That one's quicker to do than the bus tracking devices. So there are transponders that actually have to be purchased, installed, etc. for the buses. That one's a little bit more involved, and it involves third parties in a way that the tram cameras do not involve third parties. That's just us procuring that. And there are cameras. So I would say if I had to put a specific number on it for the tram cams, I think a matter of weeks, say 3 weeks. And then for the bus tracking software, I think Brian's right that we're looking at, say, 6 to 8 weeks, I think would be a safe estimate at this point.
Thank you.
Any more questions, anybody? We're going to call the meeting to a close. Do I have to ask someone to make a motion or anything? Julie's going to make a motion? Seconded, Jimmy? Jimmy, do you want to wave your hand? Who else is a committee member? Can I second?
You can.
Yep. Thank you. Before we say goodnight, just very quickly, thank you to the real folks for coming. Thank you to Howard Polivy, who's one of our resident board members, for coming. I really appreciate having a resident board member come to all these meetings. And also, most of all, to say thank you to my neighbors who are coming here, who aren't any of those two people already. I really want this place to be a place where we can start learning more about REOC and also start influencing how things get done on the island. So please ask your neighbors when they have concerns or just out of interest to come to these meetings. It's generally the first Monday of every month. Next month, Gerald will start probably a multi-month process of talking about the master lease. That's something that's very important to every single person, whether lives here or has a business here. And then the month afterwards, we have our two state elected representatives, state senator and assembly member, to talk about governance and representation here on the island. So please encourage your neighbors to join us at these meetings. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.